Welcome back, everyone, to One on One, New York's longest running sports call-in show alongside Lou Orlando. My name is Thomas Aiello, and we are pleased to be joined today by Pulitzer Prize winning author, New York Times best-selling author of Friday Night Lights, and his new book called The Mosquito Bowl, A Game of Life and Death in World War II. He is Buzz Bissinger. Buzz, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Of course. So first question, I just want to get a little bit of insight into your new book, The Mosquito Bowl. Tell us a little bit about the inspiration behind that and what you intend for the book to be in the public domain.
Well, there were several inspirations, one of which was my dad, who was a Marine in Okinawa, and I'll talk about that in a second. The inspiration was I felt there was a great story here, a kind of wonderful, semi-legendary moment of World War II that had been forgotten. In any case, the 6th Division of the Marine Corps was on the island of Guadalcanal in the fall of 1944, training for the next big battle, which turned out to be the bloodbath of Okinawa. Morale was flagging. They've been training for months. They're Marines. They're getting edgy. I mean, look, you want to know if you're going to live or you're going to die at some point. The worst thing you can do as a Marine or a soldier or a seaman is just to keep waiting and waiting. Meanwhile, the 4th and 29th regiments of the division would argue constantly about who would have the better football team if they played each other. Each regiment was stocked. I mean stocked just with great college football players. 3 All-Americans, 7 captains, 5 or 6 were all conference. 16 were either drafted or would be drafted by the pros or signed with the pros. And they would argue. And finally, one of them said, "We're Marines. We don't argue. We fight it out." So they had this football game, but it wasn't just pickup. I mean, they tried to make it the real thing. They built goalposts. They made a regulation field out of the parade ground. They printed up programs. They printed up rosters. It was broadcast on the Mosquito radio network. 1,100 Marines came. So it was this just wild, wonderful moment to get away from it all, to be boys again, to have fun. Because 4 months later, they were on Okinawa. They had shipped out, and of the 65 who played in the Mosquito Bowl, 15 were later killed. And so, as a journalist, I've been a journalist a long time and a writer, and I said, there's a great story there, a moving story, an important story, a poignant story, if I can get at it.
I would imagine from both a research standpoint and just the content, the nature of the content you're talking about, that this was not an easy book to write. So how challenging was this overall writing experience?
Well, the challenge was, and I knew this going in, and it sort of took me almost a year to say, can I do it or can't I? I knew going in, of the 65 who had played, 64 were no longer with us. They were gone. And that left one survivor who I did interview. But you ask yourself, well, how am I going to really, a key to the book is to make some of the men who played in that game come alive. I've profiled 4 of them. But at the time, I mean, how the hell do I do it? How can I write about dead people if no one is around? And you got to remember, those who died at Okinawa, they didn't have kids, they didn't have wives. They were too young. It was too tragic. But I did discover that several of them, their families had incredible paper trails. They had letters, they had essays they had written in grade school, they had report cards, they had kept everything. And then I said, all right, I think there's a way to get at it. But it took 5 years. It's not just portraying these guys, because there's a lot in the book. It's writing about war. It's writing about the complexity of war. It's writing about a lot of things. So it took 5 years.
So, Buzz, I mentioned your new book, but you are also very noted for Friday Night Lights, which has also become a movie, a very acclaimed movie. What was the inspiration behind that? And I also understand that you have become close with Boobie Miles, who is perhaps the most visible character from the Friday Night Lights saga. Can you tell me a little bit about why you picked, of all the places, that little school in Odessa, Texas, to write about, and just what you thought it would become versus what it has turned into in culture?
Well, when I decided to do this book, the inspiration was a trip down south with a friend of mine, where we went through all these little towns. And already then, downtowns were blown apart economically. A lot of storefronts were boarded up. But you would go a few blocks out of town and then you would see the high school football stadium. They were beautiful. A lot of them had built in the 30s during the WPA. They were well watered. They were painted. And I just said to myself, these aren't just stadiums. These are shrines. This is where people in small towns, or at least isolated towns, come together on a Friday night to believe in something. And from there, when I decided to do it, all roads very quickly led to Odessa. Odessa Permian at that time was legendary, not just in the state, but around the country, as the winningest, most successful high school football team of all time in Texas. And that's a big deal. I mean, Texas football is a huge deal. And what sealed the deal for me to go down there was, A, I was able to get access, I got permission, but B, when I saw the stadium, which at that point in 1988, had cost $6 million, seated 19,000 people, 2-story press box. And I said, this is high school? I mean, it was magnificent. It was like a rocket ship that had landed on Earth. And so I said, all right, let's do it. And so I went there with my family in 1988, and it became Friday Night Lights in 1990.
With some of the given socio-political undertones, how difficult was it to conduct research for Friday Night Lights?
At that time and place, I mean, they were great. They gave me great access. They didn't necessarily like the result of the entire book, but I got free roam of everything. I mean, not just the football team and the practice fields and the coaches' meetings. I got access to school, so I could hang around with these kids. By the way, I just saw Boobie Miles. Boobie Miles is the black running back in the book who gets tragically injured before the season, has tremendous football talent, but because the way he's treated in high school as basically being a dysfunctional idiot, which he is not, got no education. Boobie's had a time of it. He's had a struggle of it. He knows I say this. He's been in and out of prison. I love him. I always worry about him. And he's open about, this is what happens. When no one cares about you except as a football player, you're not going to have a chance in life. But I've stayed in touch with him since the book was written. Brian Chavez, who was the tight end who went to Harvard. I've stayed in touch with all of them one way or another. I mean, we're still very, very, very close. As to the success of the book, it's amazing. I mean, I don't know what to tell you. It's amazing. I mean, here we are, what is it, 32 years later? My math is bad. 32 years later, we're still talking about it. I mean, I got an email last week from a nice email from a woman in France who wants to, how do I get a copy? It still sells 30 to 40 to 50,000 copies a year. It's been a movie. It's been an excellent TV series. It was beyond my wildest dreams. And you get a shot like this once. It's probably not going to happen again. Although I think actually the Mosquito Bowl is a better book. It's a more important book. The stakes are higher. These are literally stakes of life and death. It's a book about honor. It's a book about duty. It's a book about service, and it's a book about a slice of wonderful American life that really doesn't exist at all. A time when we were totally unified. There was no red state or blue state. Totally unified in the defeat of the Japanese. And although there were a lot of tragedy, there were a lot of fatalities, there were a lot of casualties, it was beautiful to see what America can do on all cylinders when it's together, not just men, women in the workforce, African Americans serving despite overt racism, everyone of every socioeconomic stripe coming together. And as I say, as brutal as it could be, as tragic as it could be, as bloody as it could be, it was really something beautiful to witness. And maybe, and part of the reason I wrote the book, maybe we can somehow get back to that again. I fear for this country greatly, but I also saw in the book how great we can be when we have a common purpose and put aside, our differences.
So I have to confess, before my next question, I have not purchased a copy of Friday Night Lights, and now I have to, because you're a damn good salesman, Buzz. You really are.
I should get off the phone right now, or the Zoom. How could you not have a copy of that?
I've watched the movie. I'm 22.
No excuse. I want you to put that microphone down and go to your nearest bookstore, and it may or may not be there. I'll send you a copy.
Okay.
Anyway, I will say this. I mean, it's weird. The movie was directed by my cousin, who's really like my brother. That was by accident. I thought the movie was great. I mean, I thought he really did capture within the elements of a film, which obviously is different from a book, the real spirit of the book. I thought it was great.
So I want to go back to something you mentioned, unity in the United States of America. Obviously, 9/11 just passed, and that is still a very predominant event
Right.
in American history, especially in recent history.
Of course.
Where were you that day? And if you could pick a singular moment in sports, I know a lot of people like to bring up the Yankees, people bring up George Teague. If you could pick one where you said, we're going to get through this, which one would it be and why?
God, I've never had a question like that before. That's a good one. 9/11, my wife and I were in bed. We were kind of lounging around, and then I get a call from my ex-wife, who I'm still very, very close to, and she says, "You got to turn on the television." I said, "Well, why?" She said, "Just turn it on. This is the most incredible, most disturbing, most shocking thing I've ever seen." And we turned on the TV, and the towers are on fire. I don't know if at that point they had gone down, and the whole thing was surreal. I'm from New York. I'm from Manhattan. I called my parents. They were the Upper West Side, which is far away from the World Trade Center. But I said, "You guys all right?" And he said, "Well, we can see the smoke billowing." It's interesting you mentioned 9/11, because I have said, and I thought about this. There was I don't know if you saw it, incredible piece on 60 Minutes last weekend. I advise you to see it if you haven't, everyone listening. And I realized that the firefighters of New York were and 9/11 was the last time that we were unified. And the bravery that the firemen showed going upstairs, knowing they probably were not going to come back, but they might be able to save people, was very much like these men of World War II. So we can do it. I mean, we can do it. We can go beyond ourselves and be willing to sacrifice ourselves. And I just hope we can, continue. In terms of best Yankee moment, it has to be right after that. Remember when Tino hit the home run? That was magical, and my memory is bad, but Jeter did as well, I think, in extra innings.
Yeah, I think
Those games were magical. They ended badly. I'm a big Yankee fan. The series ended badly, but when Tino hit the home run, I mean, it was like fate. It was like God had come down and said, "I'm going to shine my power and my light on the Yankees." And the power of sports it did help to sort of temporarily heal the city. It gave us something to believe in and something to watch. It was particularly excruciating for me because my father was dying at the time. And so he was in the hospital, but we spent just a lot of nights very quietly together, just watching baseball, and sports was always a common language between us.
You won the Pulitzer Prize for investigative reporting in 1987. So in your mind, what's the key to have success as an investigative reporter, and how did you put that skill to use in a lot of your later work?
I mean, I don't think it's very complicated. I think the key is to be dogged, inexhaustible, so to speak. Don't get discouraged. You got to be willing to go down what we call a lot of rabbit holes where you're not going to find anything. Just keep at it. If you keep pecking away, you will find stuff. And so I use those reporting elements in everything I do. You got to be all in. You got to be dedicated to it 24 hours a day. And in terms of research, you got to be willing to go through tens of thousands of pages of documents, knowing that maybe only one of those pages will yield fruit. But when it yields fruit, that's exciting. It's like drawing on a little strand of a loose wire, so to speak, or loose knitting in your shirt, and you pull on it, and a little more comes out, a little more comes out, a little more comes out. And then you see, wow, this is a treasure of material. And that's how you go at it. This took me, 5 years.
Now, Buzz, with reputation reporting, there's also a image reputation, and you did a article or interview with GQ a couple of years ago. You described yourself as a shopaholic. You love to buy expensive clothing. What?
We were having such a nice time.
I just want to know, because I am very curious about these things. Do you think when you go out into this public public eye, did you approach it like, I'm going to stand out, or was it more so, this is what I enjoy doing, and if you don't like it, you can just leave?
Well, I've always been open about myself and honest. I think sometimes too open and too honest. I think there is a zone of privacy that over the years I've learned. I wrote that story honestly, the story was somewhat self-destructive, and then I was not doing well. I was not doing well emotionally. I was really not doing well personally. Everything seemed to be on the wrong cylinder. So when the story came out, and I was a shopaholic, I spent over $500,000, mostly on leather, which I do love and I wear. It was insane, and I've stopped, but I still wear it. I still go out into public because I finally did sort of reach the moment where I said, you can't care. If this is how you express yourself, go for it. I'm not hurting anybody. I think it looked pretty cool in it. Women love it. Minorities love it, and white men like you hate it. That's because you want to wear it, I'm convinced. But you have to reach a moment in life, and I think it is important. And I think this is really part of the reason I wrote the story. You must reach it. You have to be your authentic self, or as close to your authentic self as you can. And this was an appetite within me. Why I love it. We could sit here and talk about mommy and daddy and all the other things. But this is one of the ways, I express myself. Now, for the book tour, I'm actually wearing button-down shirts, which is really excruciatingly hard for me. But it's a part of my soul, and I'm not trying to be ridiculous. So that's why I do it, and I'm glad, because for me, it's expression and really creativity.
So Buzz, thank you for the time. Once again, folks, his new book is out, called The Mosquito Bowl, A Game of Life and Death in World War II. You can purchase that, I'm sure, on Amazon or anywhere on the internet. Buzz, we appreciate the time. Thank you so much. This was a wonderful conversation. So we are now going to send it back to One-on-One with Thomas Aiello. You're listening to that here on WFUV Sports.